When I was called up for Desert Storm, when I was in the reserves, we did a periodic preparation for what if we were deployed. We were, working in a civilian role, and every month we did our reserve time, and we had that process in October, and December rolled around, and we were all activated and deployed in country in Desert Storm, and that was a case where we were doing the review process and we were ready. We didn't know we were going anywhere in December, but we were prepared for it when it happened. So that's kind of what we're saying here is, I know I'm going to need a new car. What am I going to do? Oh, today's the day. I'm ready to talk about it right now, and you're prepared. Welcome to Tell Your Boss I Quit with me, Pete Gutekunst, the podcast where we help you financially bridge from where you've started to the life goals you've imagined.
All right, Pete, let's go ahead and get started here. Can you explain the importance of conducting regular financial reviews?
Yeah, I think when you sit down and like so many people, you get a job and you get onboarded and the HR gives you materials and you just check boxes and sign up for things and you don't really think about it again. And so when you do a financial review, whether you're doing it on your own or getting assistance, you're just making sure that all those elections that you made and all the things you're doing are keeping you on track for whatever that goal was that you had set into motion. So, for example, you get a job, you have a 401k, they ask you to sign up and how much do you want to withhold from your pay and how do you want to invest it. And if you never look at it again, and now you're years older and you're closer to retirement, well, maybe you were set up really aggressively and that's not the right way to be, or maybe you haven't been saving enough, or maybe you've been saving too much. So you do things, and if you don't come back and check it, it really puts you in a bad way, that you'll make some discoveries that are either you're falling behind or, and I think this is really important, you're over-sacrificing now. In other words, you max funded your 401k, and what if you don't have to, and that's more than enough? There's income that you're not enjoying or spending or putting towards some goals right now. So that's why really it's like a garden, a good financial plan. You have to touch it on a regular basis. If you just set it in place and never think about it again, you're going to come back to a weed-filled garden. So it's really important to do your regular reviews.
That leads me right into, so if I'm, working on building my wealth, building my retirement, how often am I, should I be looking at it? How often should I be working with you and then maybe reviewing myself? What's the frequency of having these financial reviews?
Yeah, it's got to be a little bit dependent upon what your goals are and where you are, what stage of life you're in. If you're 30 and you're really just saving money and enjoying life, maybe an annual review is enough. If you're closer to retirement, the closer and closer we get, and in retirement, we like to do something about every 6 months. Doesn't have to be, overly thorough, but you should be touching that every 6 months. Think about going to see your doctor. Maybe you get an annual physical, and when you're a little bit older, maybe you need to go a little more frequently, or you've been diagnosed with something that just needs a little more monitoring. So I think that's really the key. And then if you're closer to, say, you're sending your kids to college, you're just setting money aside, you just had a baby, you're putting money aside, you're just doing all that you can. You get a little closer to college, you want to make sure how well positioned am I? So we want to do it a little more frequently. So I think it has a lot to do with how near term the goals are. The closer and closer they get, the more frequently you want to check in on things. So that's how much you want to touch your financial plan. You might want to just check in on your investments, I would say once a quarter, if not once or twice a year, especially, again, that's going to be a time horizon thing. If you start looking at those, if you look at your investments a little too frequently, you're going to make some poor decisions in the short term. If you don't look at it enough, you're going to miss some opportunities or perhaps could have taken some corrective action. So I think it comes down to just spot checking your investments. That's one thing. And then looking at your plan, that's another aspect to that question.
You were talking about the correlation between a physical exam and then also your financial review, right? So when I go into a doctor's office for an annual exam, they're checking my flexibility, they're checking my heart, they're checking my eyesight. So what are we checking when we're doing our financial review? Like, what are the things that we're actually looking at?
You want to look at, number one, I always talk about what you have. And so the question is, as you get closer to retirement, do you have enough? And then eventually you're going to emotionally have had enough. So you want to always be mindful of, do you have enough? So again, the further away you are from that point, from whatever that goal is, putting kids through college, retirement, the further away you are, what you want to be doing is you have a wider range of flexibility. If you're a little bit behind where you thought you would be, that's okay. And so the things that you're looking at are, what am I adding? What do I have? What are my investments? How much am I adding to that? So that's an input. And what is it likely to accumulate to at the point that I'm going to need to start drawing upon it or using it to put a down payment on a second home or something like that. So we're measuring what you have and what you're putting into it. And then we're also doing an update is what may have changed. So we have goals today. Every time you look at your financial plan, it's a snapshot in time. It's what things look like right now and how do we project going forward from here. And so we're going to do that each time. So do you have less debt? Maybe you've been paying down your mortgage, but you did a capital improvement to your house. And so all of a sudden there's this new home equity line of credit that wasn't part of your plan 6 months ago or a year ago. And so those are the things you just want to make sure that you're constantly measuring where you're going to be along the way. So that's what we look at is I really spend a lot of time talking about cash flow and whether or not you have enough to support your lifestyle today, and are you putting enough aside for the future? So those are the things that we're looking at in that moving financial plan. And then there's other things that you might look at once in a greater while. So for example, your estate plan, do you have enough life insurance? When was the last time you updated your wills? Well, that's not something you need to look at every 6 months. Every time you go to your doctor, you don't need to say, hey, who are the guardians of are going to be guardians of my children, or who's going to be my power of attorney or something like that. But maybe every 3, 4, 5 years, something could have changed. You could have added to your family. Again, you could have aged and something's become a little more critical. One person might not be able to fill a role the way that you thought a few years ago, but those things don't change as frequently and certainly not as rapidly. So those are elements that we're looking at every several years. But the way I talk a lot about a bridge where you're kind of going from the beginning of your financial plan to the end of your financial plan. And so we have all of those elements that are part of your plan. And when you're crossing your bridge, you just want to check some of those every 6 months. Some of those are every 6 month check-ins, like your investments. Some of those are every 3-year check-ins, like your estate plan, life insurance, beneficiaries, things like that.
It sounds like when you're doing your financial plan, you're checking on your goals. But what about obviously we can see, are we off track from our goals? But what about mistakes that we're making financially? So that could be a little different from your goal. Like, boy, we started investing in here and it's really going the wrong direction. How is this financial review going to help us identify those mistakes?
Well, again, you're going to be looking at all of these elements as you're doing your review. And so if we're thinking of it as every time is a snapshot in time and what's going to happen going forward from here, we might be a little bit further behind in the future than where we thought we were, or maybe even from where we were last year. So we're going to first off, does that set us off track? And then what we're going to also do at that point is there something we need to do about it? Do we need to adjust the sails if we're going to use a sailing metaphor? And do we need to adjust our investments? Do we need to start adding a little bit of extra money at this point in time? Those are the kinds of things that we can drop into your financial plan. And a lot of times you'll find that especially when it comes to investments, are given a questionnaire. And the questionnaire asks you, what do you think you're going to do under these certain circumstances? The market goes down X percent. How are you going to respond to that? And when you're actually going through it in a review, when you're actually in a down market, that's when you start to look, okay, I'm actually in it now, and I'm measuring the plan going forward, and I can see I'm still okay. That's one reason to stay put. On the other hand, you might say, well, I answered that question that way at the time, but now that I'm in it, I don't like what I'm going through, and I don't want to have to go through this more than this one time. And so that's where we start to make some of those adjustments. And so that's why it's really important, I believe, looking at your financial plan on a regular basis is so important, because the way you feel right now and the decisions you make right now are going to be wise decisions based on what you know in the moment. You're going to change. Your perceptions will change. Your needs will change. Your goals will change. Your feelings toward risk will change. And so you're constantly asking and answering those questions over and over again in the context of where you are. And that's why I think it's important to have a review process, is you have an advocate or a process to actually go through that and ask those questions and get some feedback. So I'll kind of come back to your question, is other things that might be kind of going wrong could be how your income tax. So you're doing things just right. Your investments are accumulating well, but you're finding out I'm paying some taxes. Is there a way for me to do this without being taxed as heavily? So those are things that'll change along the way. Those are things that you're coming into and making adjustments and discovering where things are, I don't know if I want to say wrong, but maybe could be better.
So you actually answered a question that was sent in over here. They said, what do financial reviews play in setting and adjusting financial goals? So with that answered that, but let's talk about net worth optimization. So obviously what we're trying to do when we're doing our reviews is we're trying to figure out where we're headed, if we've done anything wrong, if there's been any changes. But when we're talking about optimization, now what can we actually do right after these reviews to actually move the needle?
Well, if you're measuring things, if something doesn't get measured, nothing's going to change. And if you need to measure and cut some wood, you're not going to make those cuts. You're not going to make those adjustments if you don't make those measurements. And so that's really what we're trying to do here, is how you're going to affect your net worth optimization is, as long as we're measuring and we are on track with, and we're comfortable with the strategies that we've employed, and we can see how they are going to help us meet our goals with confidence, that's how we're effectively optimizing our situation. It isn't about bragging and saying, I have the best investment portfolio, or my estate plan wording is just so perfect and better than yours. Will it actually accomplish what it's set out to do? And that's really how you're optimizing your situation is, am I doing this in the most tax efficient manner? If you don't measure it, you're not going to know. Am I accumulating assets and reaching my goals in the most effective way that I can live with? That's how you're optimizing. So really, financial planning and going through a review process is drawing up a blueprint, and then you're actually starting to build the structure, and you're coming back and actually measuring, does it fit? Does it work? And if something's not quite right, what should I do about it? That's going to optimize your strategy, and that's going to optimize your wealth.
For some people that are actively involved in their financial planning, what are some tools that they can use in between, I guess, the actual reviews with you as a planner? What are some tools that they can use on their own to stay on track?
We live in a day and age where there's a lot of resources that are available. A lot of 401k plans have financial planning or retirement, measurement tools. And I think those are helpful to give you sort of a feeling for where you are. They're helpful to making an allocation decision. So those things are very helpful. A lot of people are kind of handy with a spreadsheet. That can be a good thing and a bad thing, but they can be handy with a spreadsheet. So if that's the way you want to measure things, those tools are very helpful. But a lot of the tools I think that are most valuable are really the very simple, finer things. Is if cash flow, if we're trying to build and accumulate assets for a future income, it's really important, I think, to track what your spending is now. That's just a matter of how much goes out of your checking account, if that's your main bill paying account. That's something that's easily, just journal that. I think that's a really good tool. Just a journal. We're working on creating a journal for individuals, but you could just get a blank journal and what did I spend this month? What did I do differently this month? Those kinds of things I think actually are more helpful than some of the analytical tools would be. But those are all the things that are available online through your 401k service. You can go, if you have a mortgage, they have a lot of tools where it'll show, what if I make an extra payment? How soon can I pay it down? And you can really get a feeling for how valuable that would be or not. There's a lot of those types of things available to us today.
When we're talking about financial reviews, we're thinking about, investments that we've made, things, growth things. What about when you're actually conducting a financial review? How often do you come across people that that you can help them with, like, debt? Like, people have mortgages, people have their credit cards. They're going up, they're going down. They've got boats, they've got all these things. So how does debt play into financial review?
Well, it's a big part of it. On primary planning elements, the way we put together a balance sheet, we don't just have the liability, but we have the actual payment that you're making, the rate that you're paying. So there's a lot of information there to be able to have an informed conversation on just that very kind of a question. Let's just think of it this way. If you're paying off debt at 7% versus putting that money to work in an investment, you could definitely earn more than 7%, but there's going to be a degree of risk in that. And if I could say to you, I'll give you an investment idea where it's guaranteed 7%, your ears would perk up. Well, that's what paying down debt at 7% does for you. Those are well-spent dollars. You build wealth either by paying down your debt or by saving money. So that's really where that's a very important aspect is, are we better off paying that down sooner, or are we better off putting those dollars aside for the long term? It's also an element where you're earning an income now and you can afford to manage that debt. But if you didn't have those debt payments, you're not going to require as much cash flow on a monthly basis to support the same lifestyle. So if those payments, if those debt payment, if the liabilities will be covered by the time you're retired, that also puts us in a better position. So it's the timing of when that will happen. So that's absolutely a big part of the question. And like I said, we're taking a snapshot in time, but because it's a review, we're constantly updating and remeasuring. And that's really when we come back to those liabilities. Maybe there's a window of time where it's easier, or just the only way to accomplish a certain goal is to take on some debt, but we put into it a strategy where it's going to be out of the way and not a problem later on. We want to look at that in a 360-degree view when we're doing a review.
Sure. So a lot of times, at least I'm taking a look at my own life, as I make adjustments, it's not quarterly or annually. Sometimes I'm making financial decisions weekly, daily, monthly, right? So when does it benefit somebody to actually go through with the financial advisor to make sure that these decisions we're making are sound?
I think it really comes back a lot to what the actual goals are. But if I could lay it out as a timeline, is when you're initially gathering the information. So let's say we're actually building the financial plan. We're writing up the plan to begin with. We're going to spend, a great deal of added time there to put all the pieces together so we know what it is that we're actually coming back to periodically and reviewing. And I had said earlier where when you're younger, maybe an annual review is enough. And when you're getting older, maybe every 6 months is enough. That's a time frame where enough can change in that short a period of time. So if I were to ask you every 6 months, is there something that's going to happen in the next 6 to 12 months? Other than a surprise, you should have a pretty good idea of something in that short a time frame that could occur. And so you can begin to put that preparations for that and incorporate that into your plan. So to your point, if something happens, you're looking at it every month, it's probably because something just happened. Your car went, you weren't planning on buying a new car or something like that. So those are things that were, if I said to you, when's the next time you need to buy a new car? 12 months from now. I think this one's got 12 months of life left in it. And it goes 3 months later. Well, we already had that on the radar. So that's really, I think, where if you've got a review process and something happens, you're just basically having that review a little bit sooner than you might have otherwise had it, but you're well prepared, to execute and tackle that issue. I'll put it this way. I was just thinking, as I was saying that too, I was reminded when I was called up for Desert Storm, when I was in the reserves, we did a periodic preparation for what if we were deployed. We were, working in a civilian role, and every month we did our reserve time, and we had that process in October, and December rolled around, and we were all activated and deployed in country in Desert Storm, and that was a case where we were doing the review process and we were ready. We didn't know we were going anywhere in December, but we were prepared for it when it happened. So that's kind of what we're saying here is, I know I'm going to need a new car. What am I going to do? Oh, today's the day. I'm ready to talk about it right now, and you're prepared.
Yeah. So a lot of those are like life situations that you were actually planning before it happens because you're anticipating. But when we're talking about maybe some economic conditions that change, that's out of our control, and say we just had a review last month, right? And so now we're going to go ahead and make some adjustments. Is it wise to have another review right now because of changing politics, changing economic conditions?
So let's think about that, what you're actually saying. So do things change so much in the investment world? Because really what you're asking is specifically about investments. And did something change so much that 3 months ago we had no idea or no contingency plan? I don't think that we had the right investment strategy if something changed so much that we need to hop in there and make a change. Now, you might want to have a conversation about it. So I'm going to reframe your question and say, is it right to have a conversation about it? Yes. And because you're doing regular reviews, you're having that ad hoc conversation in the context of the plan that you're regularly reviewing. And so did your goals change? Did your attitudes toward risk change? What changed that this economic environment has caused you to make an adjustment to your financial plan? That's really, you're having that conversation. Now, in all fairness, it might be enough for you to say, yeah, it's enough. I think I need to make a change. I don't like what's happening here. That means that your plan has changed. That means your attitudes toward risk have changed. That means your goals might have adjusted. So yes, you would hop in and have that kind of conversation. But I would argue that in the context of your investments, you are positioned that if those things happen, you are prepared in the sense that I know what I'm going to do if it happens, or I know how I'm going to behave if it happens. And that's why you're doing a review, is just to make sure, am I behaving the right way under those circumstances? You don't want to just be markets down today, I think I better do something, because guess what? It could be back up tomorrow, and that was a very bad decision. And so that's why we want to keep it in context of your plan. To me, that's probably the biggest reason to do a review, is it helps you stay confident in your plan so that you're doing the right thing and you're following your strategy. Because if you're constantly changing your plan, changing your strategy, you're always going to be a step behind.
So when you're working with you, let's, get a taste. When you're doing these reviews, I think it sounds to me like you're telling me that you're also leaving them with, hey, these are contingency plans. These are things that we are anticipating. If this happens, calm, these types of things. They know, your clients at least know, hey, this is happening. And we're looking at quarterly, maybe annual reviews. And bar something extremely unlikely to happen, they already have the arsenal of things that they know that they're going to do and pivot towards, or not.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. So if you're someone who withdraws from your investments in retirement, we might have an appropriate strategy, an investment strategy in place. And we may also have a sleeve or an element to that investment strategy that has less volatility or maybe even, downside protection. And so we can point to that and say, if something goes wrong, back to what you said about the economic situation, if something were to happen, this part of your portfolio should be behaving in such a way that we would feel comfortable, then confident that we're going to withdraw, and it won't be bad timing to make that withdrawal. If we're building assets and we have some money in savings, and you're saying, Pete, I could add to my investments, I just don't feel like I want to for whatever reason right now. But then that's a conversation we have on a review. And then something happens and creates a buying opportunity. Well, hey, we had this conversation. I didn't want to put that money to work. And now all of a sudden I have an opportunity that I didn't see before my last review. So that's really, if we're having that constant conversation, you can see now why you don't have to do it every month, every quarter, necessarily every 6 months. If there is a planned, proactive conversation, then these short, brief, intermediate conversations are just picking up, and we're doing what we said we would do if such and such it would happen, and we're prepared for it. That's really, I think, the power of doing a review, is you can take action as appropriate or confidently, be patient under a number of circumstances that might happen in the short term.
I gotcha. So for people that aren't used to working with financial advisors, or they don't know what to expect, an annual review is obviously probably going to be a little bit longer or more comprehensive than a biannual, and then quarterly. So the more often you have them, probably the shorter they go. But what can somebody expect to, like, time-wise, to spend with a financial advisor to do like a comprehensive review versus maybe just a quick review?
Well, if we're building a plan from the ground up, like I said earlier, if we are building from the ground up and gathering all of the information, it could take several meetings in a very short period of time. But once we have that in place, I'll call it a snapshot in place, there might be things like estate planning. That's something that we don't necessarily have to do all up front, all at once. We're going to get to it. And I find that's also a real value of doing a regular review, is we can do a check-in on the investments or a check-in on the economic environment. But we haven't had time up to now to talk about the estate plan. Let's spend this meeting talking about that, because these other things are in pretty good shape. So the answer to your question, the short answer is, we should be able to have an hour meeting. If we have everything and we are up to date, as long as the information is back and forth, so that I meet with you and I'm pretty well up to date on where things are from the last time that I spoke to you, well, then we're just having that updated conversation, and we might pivot and talk more about estate planning in this meeting while we cover, your investments. Or maybe right now it's a more volatile economic environment. We'll spend a little more time talking about what's happening in the economic environment, what to expect, and how we're positioned, or how we should adjust how we're invested. I think that, once you go past an hour on a review, you're certainly 90 minutes is it's hard to kind of retain and make you're making too many decisions. So at that point, do we get enough done and we can do it at the next one in 6 months? Or is there something here that's unfinished and we need to follow up and regroup? I think that's really a realistic expectation, when you're doing a review process. Thank you for listening. And if our discussion resonates with you, let's start a conversation about what matters most to you. Go to goodfinancial.com, click contact, and schedule a 30-minute chat. I'd love to hear from you.